All right. So yes, this is my first NextGov event on staff. So hopefully I still have a job when this is over. We've got a great lineup here today. So we're going to be talking about how you deal with the citizen from a social media perspective, right? How do you engage? Why do you engage? What's the best way to do these things? And we've got a fantastic panel here to help walk us through that. So starting with Carol and coming down the line, if you could introduce yourself, give us an idea of your title, and then in plain language, what do you do?
Carol Crawford, and my title is Chief for Digital Media in our Office of Communications and Public Affairs. And, our office leads our web and social media work across the agency, manages our main channels, develops the governance and standards for what CDC does in these areas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Lawson from U.S. Department of State, Bureau of Consular Affairs. You may know us as TravelGov Online. We manage Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Yelp profiles. And our two main areas that we focus on are crisis communication and then also public engagement. So we're a very engaged account. We respond to you. And I think it would surprise a lot of people to know there's only 3 or 4 people working on that account at any given time. And we have a combined audience of 921,000 or so followers between Facebook and Twitter.
I'm Raymond Piper. I'm the social and mobile team lead at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So in that role, I oversee our social media platforms, as well as advise our regions and program offices if they're looking to create accounts or and on the overall digital strategy. On the mobile side, I manage the FEMA app. And our text messaging program.
Excellent. So just to start off, kind of coming a little slowly, Carol, we'll start with you. What is the point of engaging the citizen? Why bother?
It's very important to engage the citizen. Everything that we do at CDC is to get health information to the citizens, either the consumers or health professionals. And engaging is an important process. I think some of the speakers earlier, their expectations that we would engage. I think in our end, it helps us ensure that people are really receiving, understanding the health content that we're doing. So we consider it very, very important.
Do you get any value as an agency from engaging?
We definitely do. We learn a lot about what's working that we're sending out and what's not working. So if we're putting out information on a topic and we get a lot of questions or comments, or we have an event where there's Q&A and people clearly don't understand maybe what we're saying, maybe they've got fears that we haven't addressed previously that we can react to. So we definitely use it as part of our cycle and evaluating the health content that we're putting out.
Raymond, how does FEMA engage with the citizen? Obviously, I think most people in the audience could assume during disasters, you're pushing out information to help people with what they need. But on a day-to-day, how are you engaging?
So one of the key things that FEMA focuses on is preparedness. So looking at how to get people ready for a disaster. Because once the disaster hits, it's too late. Or if the hurricane's barreling towards the Florida coastline, now that's not the time to go get, your water and your bread and, as the shelves are emptied. And you see it time and time again, it's always a news piece. So one of the ways to engage is by providing that information and then listening to how people respond and then answering questions, giving them advice, and taking a proactive role in answering questions, I think is a key part to any time.
Lori?
I would like to say, when you think of why government entities should engage on social and other digital platforms, you think of the customer's expectation with private sector entities and also even like local utilities. I had a great experience a few months after I started this job where this is going to be related, I promise. I was making a lasagna, and this was a labor of love. I sliced everything up, ready to go, and then all the power goes out. So kind of a half joke, but also wanting an answer of when my power is going to go back on, I started tweeting the local power authority, like hashtag pray for the pasta, hashtag save lasagna, but they responded and they said, here's how to check, the status of your neighborhood, here's how to sign up for updates, here's how to report an outage. And so that really solidified to me as a customer, looking at this utility, which kind of group with government services as well, that sort of engagement cultivates such a positive feeling towards that entity. And I also felt really in tune with the resources and to get that back and forth. And that's kind of given me my inspiration to always try to give a good customer service through engagement on our accounts, because someone was rooting for my lasagna. So I want to spread the love and have that experience for others as well when they interact with our bureau.
So we're just getting started here, and I think we already have the headline. The State Department social media lead is a troll.
A little bit.
Wait a little bit, but you were, Joe, right? You were engaging with your service provider, right? And social media, particularly Twitter, tends to be about snark and humor and funniness. But how do you, as a manager, how do you differentiate between somebody who's a disgruntled citizen versus a troll who's just trying to get your ire up?
So I think that's a great question. Sometimes as a social media manager, you feel a little bit like a punching bag. Folks come to you either when they're really, really happy or really, really angry. There's not a whole lot in the middle. It needs to be some sort of noteworthy experience, whether positive or negative, for them to come towards you. But then you also have where you're tied into news stories that are just hot button issues, and then you get the trolls. But in that, some people have actual legitimate questions. So I think the important thing to look at is whether or not there's an opportunity to educate that person about a process or legitimately help them. Is there an actual question there? So it's perfectly valid to find our process frustrating. It's perfectly valid to be angry that something is not working the way you think it should. So looking at those feelings and understanding that those feelings are valid and that's actual valuable feedback for us as the managers of these different processes, and then separating out the trolls that are just saying, rude comments and there's no real question or no opportunity to educate them about a process.
Carol, have you all figured out a way to inoculate against trolls yet?
No, we haven't. But we have the same issue. We try to look for people that have actual questions or or maybe they don't have all the facts. Maybe that we could help point them to some information. We're lucky on a lot of our channels that we have a lot of public health professionals or people that are really interested in public health that often step in before we even have a chance maybe, and things tend to calm down. But people have their right to believe what they want and state what they want, and we try to allow that as much as possible and engage where it just makes most sense.
I imagine FEMA might be a unique challenge because when people are, particularly during disasters, if they're tweeting at you, if they're reaching out to you all, they're under extreme stress and duress and I'm sure unhappy. So how do you make that distinction? Is there a way to filter that?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say there's probably. I wouldn't even look for a way to filter it. You really have to take by case, look at what the root cause for what why they're coming onto the platform. If they're, there's an adage for the internet, don't feed the trolls, and that's honestly sometimes the best way to do it.
Feed them lasagna.
Yes. But in the root, at the root, this is a very stressful time for somebody during a disaster. A lot of times if they're trolling you, to use that term, it's because they have somewhere in the process they became legitimately angry at it. And that's what we see a lot of our trolls. Minus conspiracy theories, but can't get away from those. But that being said, you look at the opportunity that any one of those comments could present. It could be something that can give you the opportunity, as Lori said, educate, show them how the process works, try to point them in the right direction. They may not want to hear it at that time, but they may come back. And then a lot of times, sometimes the community is self-correcting. If somebody is specifically putting out bad information, you got to have some faith too that the people who are followers of your account have a healthy interest in it and they want to make sure the correct information is getting out as well. On the flip side of that, you got to also watch them sometimes that they may put out wrong information, so you want to be there to kind of nudge them in the right direction and be like, hey, no, that policy might have changed and here's the correct information.
Sticking with Twitter for a moment, I find, and I think this is probably general knowledge, that the most engaging Twitter accounts are ones that are funny, enjoyable, engaging because they lighten up my day in an otherwise, Washingtonian setting. Myself, though, I tend to have kind of a mean sense of humor, so I try to stay away from that, right? If I were to be funny on Twitter, I'd probably alienate most of my audience. So, Lori, how do you walk that balance of being fun and engaging without drifting over to offensive and problematic?
Right. We try to keep it positive, of course, and upbeat, and we want to come across as people. I think it's really easy to get mean to this faceless government account, but once you realize you're talking to a person who's actually engaging with you online, people tend to soften up in their language a little bit and be more receptive to the information you're giving them. So while we aren't cracking jokes every time we reply, we are saying things like, "Hi, how are you?" Or even acknowledging emotions. That sounds frustrating, or maybe a joke. If it's appropriate, if they seem, they're giving us a joke, we can play a little bit as we respond. And even if we can't be funny necessarily, to at least be human. So saying things like, "Congratulations on your new baby. Here's how you get a consular report of birth abroad," and playing into the emotions that are there.
Carol, is this something that you all have to deal with?
I mean, a similar answer. We're not trying to be funny, but we do try to be human, just like you are, especially with health. Health is very personal, very individual. We want to not be funny, but be relatable. We don't want to, our scientists would all like us to have everything say influenza instead of flu, for example. We try to make things understandable, more the terms that people use. I mean, even just saying poop instead of something else is something that we try to do. It's not really, that can be funny, but we don't mean it funny. We want it to be relatable in the way that people are going to understand it and share it or do something with it.
And Raymond, how do you walk that line at FEMA, particularly during a disaster, right? Where you have, we were talking before about using Instagram for showing some of the heroics that go on during rescue situations and the like. When is it appropriate to just be, black and white, here's what things are, and when do you be uplifting, when do you be funny?
So I think the important part of that is, we always want to, as a government account, be the trusted voice for that. So you definitely have to weigh the situation. During a disaster, you don't want to be making jokes. You want to make sure people have the tools, the information that they need to get through that disaster. Be it a life safety message of if it's flooding, turn around, don't drown. Don't drive through water because your car will die. And so we have to tailor the message to the situation. Now, at other times, like last year during Valentine's Day, we made Valentine's cards, basically, the kinds like your kids would get in school, and but we tailored them to preparedness message. So like one had hearts and they had different preparedness message. So there's definitely the time and place for levity, and definitely want to make sure that always look at what's going on around in the environment, because not even outside of a disaster, there could be something else happening in the news that may make that post or tweet then sound insensitive to what's going on.
Yeah, you definitely have to be aware. And more news you can use. Everybody, you have 2 weeks to follow FEMA on Twitter to get your Valentine's Day card. So, we mentioned Instagram, right? That you would use that for certain photos. You wouldn't necessarily use that for messaging during an emergency. Carol, looking at the different types of social media, what do you use different venues for?
I mean, we obviously, we can tell the demographics on our channels, obviously, and we try to put more appropriate content on the channels that we use. For Instagram, we've been starting to use stories to talk about, people are really, on our Instagram account, we know they're really interested in science and public health and opportunities for them to engage with scientists or things that we're doing at the agency. They really like that kind of thing. So we pay attention to the comments, the types of people that are following, what they're asking, and try to tailor.
Lori?
Yeah, we definitely try to tailor based on the platform. You'll see similar themes throughout just because of our mission. But if you look at Facebook, for example, a lot of the behavior we see, people will tag loved ones who are going to different areas, so we try to keep that in mind in the content we create. And Twitter, it's a good vehicle for crisis communications because it's very rapid and people don't wait for the evening news anymore to figure out what's going on the street corner. They pull out their phone, put in the location on Twitter, and we want to be there. And then When looking at starting a new platform, I always think it's a good idea to look at the existing conversations about topics that relate to your work. So when we became involved on Reddit, we spent some time looking up keywords like passport, US visa, US citizen traveling, and seeing what was there. We noticed there was a lot of maybe not complete answers being given or even incorrect answers, and stepping in on that platform, capturing the right tone of voice because we did that research where we could be a little bit more funny on Reddit, and joining that platform and be able to effectively answer those questions and also fit in and not be like the boring government Reddit account.
Raymond, how do you use different accounts?
So, as you mentioned with our Instagram, we made the effort for our Instagram account to make it as a place to kind of highlight what the agency does, those stories that aren't necessarily, here's how you get your disaster assistance. This is the life safety message. It's more about, here are the men and women who are out rescuing people. Here are the men and women on the streets helping get information to people. And there's some education in there because it can lead to questions about, like, well, what does a disaster survivor assistance team actually do? I see them knocking on doors in your pictures. For Facebook's kind of a little bit of both of that, where we're able to use that to tell stories, and we put an emphasis on using that as a storytelling platform. But it's also a way to push information during a disaster. One of the things that we've been using extensively during disasters is using Facebook Live, which gives us the ability to because we have a lot of partners that work with FEMA during a disaster, so we have a meteorologist liaison. So we're able to pull them in, get them on Facebook Live to give an update as Hurricane Irma was coming towards Florida. We were able to provide updates through Facebook Live, and then have a FEMA person be able to provide, here's what you should do, life safety, if you got to evacuate, know where to go, things like that. And then Twitter is we use it really as that way to push those alert messages during a disaster. So yeah.
Carol, did you want to jump in?
I would just say it was really similar. I mean, we use Twitter for alerts, Facebook in particular for health. There's a lot of moms that are often in charge of their health and their family, so that's a way we target. So I really could resonate with everything that they also said.
So, throwing it open to all three of you, whoever wants to answer. What's the point of Snapchat?
Actually, we've worked with Snapchat in the past during Hurricane Matthew and during the winter storms that year. And I think the benefit from our side was we were able to work with them and be inserted into the story. So we were able to talk about, insert into the story, hey, here's what FEMA suggests you should do during this, because people will click that news part for it, and they will use it as a news feed. It'll give them that instant news. So I think it's a way to get some disaster-type communications into that process.
Now, you did that by working directly with Snapchat?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we are setting up a Snapchat account, but that has other issues from internal issues.
So there's a point there I'll come back to, but first, Laura, do you guys use Snapchat, and if so, why?
We're not currently on Snapchat. The State Department does have a Snapchat account, but we have a specific carve-out of accounts for the Bureau of Consular Affairs, and we don't currently have a Snapchat. I actually think the question of, what is the point of Snapchat is one that's really relevant to a lot of discussions that we've had about account management. So our philosophy is we want to be not necessarily cautious, but make really rational, sound decisions when looking at a new platform, because if it doesn't go well, you'd have to retire it and you'd have to know what you're going to do with it and have a plan for it. So before jumping into it, even though it's new, even though it reaches this specific age demographic that we haven't really explored yet, we don't want to jump in headfirst until we have a good idea of what type of sustainable content plan we can have. So I think that question comes up every time you look at a new platform and there's the temptation to jump into whatever's new and whatever's happening, whatever those darn millennials are using. But you need to look at what's right for your message, and you need to look at how sustainable it is and what resources you have. So as a result, we're not currently on Snapchat, but if you have any great ideas, please let me know.
To just kind of echo that, the account creation thing, because a lot of times program offices will come to us and be like, we need a Twitter account. Twitter will solve all our problems. And my solution to that has been to basically give them homework. And by doing that, and it's asking, well, how, exactly the question, how are you going to sustain it? How are you going to grow an audience, because you're starting at zero? And then how does that message that you want to put on that account differ from what we could put out on the main account or through a regional account that is already established, that has followers? And those types of questions usually get them thinking, and they're like, well, maybe we don't want to do that. And I always point out to them, there are other options besides social media. You have your email list, you have your web pages, you have your just normal interaction that we still do with people, like social media.
Traditional media.
Yes. Yes. Your traditional media outlets, and all those things can contribute to getting to that point where they can determine, do I actually really need this? Or is this just something that would be nice to have?
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, we definitely need to evaluate the channels before we just set them up and the purpose. And so we haven't ever found a true need for a Snapchat account, so we don't have one. We have, some of our programs have engaged on the partnership from time to time to help provide content for other existing Snapchat accounts and things like that made a lot of sense for us to do. But having our own just really hasn't matched any purposes. I think we also have more work to do to really, something I'm trying to educate CDC on this year is, how to rethink our content. Because even just the Instagram stories that I mentioned, just having us really think about developing content in that style has been pretty challenging. And I think just rethinking how you really organically grow things for digital that are going to be engaging and interesting in digital, and moving away, for more traditional ways that we develop content. I think we also need to do some prep there for really going to be ready to do things like that in an effective way.
And off of Ray's point, where there's the tendency to say, like, let's do social, it's going to fix everything, which doing social for the sake of using social media, I think, is not an effective strategy. You need to actually take time and sit down and talk about your intended outcome, and then work backwards from there and have a defined purpose for your account. So if your followers are following your account, they're doing it for a reason. There's something there that they think is useful. The more you can hone in on that, and the more you give them content that's consistently useful for them, the less likely they are to unfollow your account. So we actually came together as a team and formalized this in the form of a style guide, and have some key decision points and questions we ask before adding something to our account. So what could be simple of like, oh, just throw it on social media, we actually have a moment to pause there and say, is this something useful to our followers? Does it fit in our scope? Is this sort of request indicative that we need to change the direction of our account slightly if we're getting a lot of these requests? So to actually have an intentional strategy there is very important, versus saying, let's just do it because it's new.
Another open question, all three, whoever wants to jump in first. How important is it for you to grow your social media audiences? I imagine as federal agencies, particularly your three federal agencies, a lot of people are coming to you because they're interested in what you're doing. You have that high profile. You are the official verified account for these issues. Is it a concern for you all to build your audience, or have you built it and they come?
I mean, we obviously want to grow our accounts. I mean, our goal is to get health information to people who need it. The more people that we have on our accounts, the more we feel like we're fulfilling our mission. I also think it's a sign of whether you're being effective or not effective in social media with your accounts growing, if people are sharing your content. If it's not really happening at the pace you expect, you may want to, I think it's time to reevaluate what we're doing.
I see followership more as kind of a measure of your performance versus necessarily a goal to aim for. Because sure, you can have a ton of accounts following you, but if you aren't actually meeting their needs, what's the point, right? Like, if they have hidden all of your posts, are they really your follower? So to look at that and see maybe engagement rate instead, and seeing how well you're interacting with your followers versus just having that number, and trying to get at the heart of what analytics you're looking at and what you want to accomplish. So we love it when people interact with our stuff a lot because we are an interactive account. And then I think a natural progression of that is people want to follow our account because we're useful. And so we focus on usefulness and we like follower growth, but we aren't pursuing solely follower growth.
I completely agree. I agree, definitely. That's how we look at it as well.
Raymond, besides manufacturing hurricanes, how do you grow your account?
Well, disasters do seem to give us a pretty healthy bump. Not that I want more disasters for more followers. But I think really it's having a consistent message, your consistent voice, and as Lori said, providing useful content, not just posting to post. Like sometimes we feel that we have to make a post today. We have to make posts, and that's not always the case. If anything, if you overpost, you're going to alienate followers, and they'll either hide your content so they won't get it when they need it the most, or they'll unfollow you completely. Generally speaking, social accounts will grow or on their own as long as they're as long as you're watering the garden, people will still come in over time. But it's that engagement along the way that's going to give your account worth to your followers.
Excellent. One more question from me, and then I'll open it up to the audience. But social media is a relatively new thing still in the grand scheme of technologies, but it definitely feels like it's gotten to a maturity level where it's a solid thing. I mean, look, we have government agencies that have social media managers, so obviously the time has come. What's new in social media? What's on the horizon? What should we expect to change?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is people are going to want to be able to engage live. Where if you do hold a Facebook Live session, it's not just you broadcasting information. They'll want to ask you questions, and they have that, and I even think now, they have that expectation that they'll be able to ask questions and have them answered during the session. That's one of the things that I'm hoping to expand over the course of next year, is being able to hold live sessions that we can have that interaction. Facebook's algorithm is a big conversation point right now because of how they're changing it. One of the things of note is they're still going to put emphasis on Facebook Live, and that's a way for government accounts to reach their audience and get that engagement in there. And then I told one of our JFO staff, because they were upset about negative comments, or they were getting pushback. And I was like, in the end, that's still engagement on your post, good, bad, or ugly, and that's helping to feed Facebook's algorithm, which will then present it more often. So don't necessarily take the bad posts to heart and do that. I like to think about it sometimes in the just pure numbers situation, because it helps my hurt feelings, because sometimes they're mean.
So I don't care what you tweet at me, just spell my handle right.
Yes, exactly. Make sure you get the spelling right. That way that the engagement's there. And then I think those are the two big things I think that we'll continue to see have an effect.
So I think one side effect of social media reaching maturity is they kind of realize they can make a huge profit by corporate involvement and corporations wanting to spread messages. And so coming in as a government agency where, sure, you aren't the most profitable one in the room, but you sure are helpful to the citizen, you really have to be prepared to tackle the changes in algorithms that may or may not prioritize your type of account and your type of information and your ability to do paid social. So I know like the Facebook algorithm changes are a big topic now in social media. So how are you going to rise and overcome that obstacle where it may not be working with your current strategy? So the mention of Facebook Live, that's huge. And so we're trying to do more live video as well. But we have seen a lot of success with live chats where we're saying to people following our account, hey, we're here live for an hour, ask your question, we'll answer it. We're sitting down waiting for you. So having that one-on-one interaction in almost real time, I think, is very important and helps overcome some of the challenges that the algorithms are throwing our way.
You know, I don't know what the future of social media will be or won't be, but I know that I'm trying to be sure that we stay nimble and prepared and willing. A lot of times I think it's hard in a government environment to be kind of willing to explore the next thing, be willing to continue to engage, but in things that may not feel as comfortable as the way we've engaged in the past. And I said it a minute ago, but I think a challenge for us is to kind of keep pace with the kind of content and the kind of information and the way people want to see it nowadays. I think if we can keep trying to be ready in those areas, we'll be able to be prepared for whatever is next.
Excellent. Got just a few minutes left here. Do we have any questions in the audience? First in my eye line here.
Hey, my name is this on? Okay. Hi, my name is Jonathan Bruskin. I'm with Sprite Bulb. I don't know if you all were here for the first presentation that we had from the two ladies from AARP. It was great, and they talked about how they're trying to appeal to their demographic population. And I'm wondering the same about social media. We always talk about how, we're kind of catering to the millennials because they're all on Twitter and Facebook and all that other stuff. But, like my mom's on Facebook and she's posting embarrassing things to my feed. And so I'm wondering if you guys are experiencing that and how you're kind of reaching out to folks in the kind of AARP demographic.
Yeah, is there a way to break out of some of those normal demographics that we think of?
So for FEMA, I try not to ever think about just in terms of millennials or whatever generational term you want to use, because I forget what they all are. The important thing is providing consistent information that's going to be important to your audience in there. So you do have to look at different demographics, but for at least from the FEMA side, we tend to look at more of, all right, if you're in this situation, what are you going to need? And then if you have, say you're in a wheelchair, do we need to tailor information for that area? Do we know if this area has a higher non-English speaking community? Then we'll want to look for information for that. And in the end, it's really about looking at how can we provide that best information.
I think providing options is important. So yes, we answer your passport question on Twitter, but you can also call into the National Passport Information Center. So basically by having these different options, people can self-select into the one that's most convenient for them. So if you're most familiar with calling in, waiting on hold, that's fine if that's your preferred method. But me, I'm a little impatient. I would much rather tweet someone, go about my day, and then have the answer when it pops up on my phone screen. But that comes down to personal preference. It's convenient for me because I know the technology very well and very familiar with it. So just keeping those options open. I don't think there's any one avenue that's going to solve every problem for every person. So just letting people have the option for themselves.
I mean, most of our channels have general audiences on them, like lots of different demographics, and we try to look more at the content, be sure that we're tailoring the content so that people can find what is aimed at them.
And unfortunately, I had too much fun asking questions, so we're out of time. But these three should be around for at least a little bit afterwards if you want to ambush them out as they get off the stage. But please, join me in thanking our fantastic panel.